Hey everyone, this is going to be a point of view style video, step by step of how to make these skirt supports in one piece, both sides. They are quite bulky factory, so they didn't suit the right height of the car, so we had to slim them right up. Okay, so RX3 back on the ground at right height. Can chop all this out now for steering clearance and start the front tubs, do the skirt supports to brace all this in and lock the towers in, pull the top of this tower down so it's actually flush at this side. But looks good at right height. Flare sits in a nice spot. It's a bit of 40mm box on the bottom of the sill there. So plenty of clearance there, really good arm angles. There's a 40mm bolt-on spacer behind this rim, and we've still got a long way to go, so we're going to have to get some other wheels made for this car. Okay, so the skirt support all trimmed out, plenty of tyre clearance now. I'm probably going to unpick this original 86 tub. Might even cut it along here so that when I make my new tub I can lap it over and plug it to it and actually weld this joint. But this one runs the reverse firewall lip. The firewall normally butts to it from that side. I'm going to run it on this side so that I can put my firewall against it on this side and make it actually level with the RX3 one instead of 40mm back where it is. Okay, so stock skirt support is something like that, which is obviously not going to work. So we'll just template a rough idea of what we're going to go for. Try and taper it back in there, give it a fair bit of clearance. Alright, so we've got a rough template of what we're going to aim for. We know to taper it down, tuck it under around this height. So we'll transfer it to some steel now and see what we can come up with. Probably hard to follow along my chicken scratches, but it makes sense in my head. I'm going to just pump this area out. I'm going to roll this over. Leave about 40mm there, and we'll make another separate piece for the next tip. Load the straights. Now we'll just cut this curve with the Pullmax shears. Okay. Curve's trimmed off. Just roughly mark it out on another piece for the other side, make life easier before I go too far and start tipping flanges and stuff, and I've got a harder reference point. So I'll usually just use the bead roller to tip a faint line just to follow along instead of trying to push it through manually freehand on this. It's a bit violent, so I'll probably go with like a soft lower wheel and probably this round guy just to give it a tiny bit of radius, and I'll plop those on this now and run it through. Okay, so before I run this through, another easy mistake that I've made thousands of times in my life is you got to remember you're working backwards on some folds. So with these flanges you're going to bring them up towards you, and this one you want it to actually fold towards the engine of the car. So with this it's actually going to tip it up. So I got two choices here. I can turn this into the opposite side, or I can go back to the bench, mark this on the other side and come back. Okay, so we've marked one out the opposite side now. Take that back over and try again. Okay, so running this through moderate pressure, just let the die do all the work, just to give you a faint line. And through again. Okay, so started to tip it up a little bit. We'll go a little bit more before we take it into the Pullmax. Okay, so that's two just little light passes on the bead roller. And as you can see, it's started to tip it over. And as you go more and more and more passes, the further it's obviously going to tip it over. Another thing to note, this can be entirely done with just the bead roller and by hand. It's how I did it before I owned a Pullmax. And you just keep going along, and how I got a larger radius is I'll just drive next to the line I just did, and it'll just gradually bump it around and give you a nice larger radius than what just tipping on the same point over and over would give you. Just take it over the car, get a quick check, make sure it's doing what you want it to do. It seems to be going fine. So I've left it a bit long to pass. The original skirt support only comes to about here, but I'll just go past it, leave excess. And I might do this whole one on the bead roller just for the video, just to show that you don't actually need any fancy machines or anything like that. You can do it all by hand. It just takes longer. It takes a lot more passes on this. To do it with the bead roller, probably take like 20 passes, whereas you get away with it at about 2 using the Pull Max. So it's a lot quicker. Okay, cool. First part of the battle is done. You've got a nice radius on a curve. Worked out well. Looks good. Uh-oh. It's not straight anymore. How do we fix this? So we're going to have to stretch this area here to bring the material back down, and any area that's too full like this, we're going to have to shrink it. So you can shrink it 2 ways. Probably the quickest and easiest way is to chuck it in the kick shrinker, or you can use a tucking fork and knock them out, but I'd say the majority of people are just going to say put it in the kick shrinker and be done with it. So that's what we'll do. Okay, feed it into this little guy, shrink dies in. Helps a lot if you actually got these machines down, but sometimes if I'm making inner arch or something like that and I need to do quick little adjustments, I'll just have it with me next to the car instead of bolting it down. It just makes it a little bit of a nightmare when you're using it sometimes, just wobbling around everywhere. So we just want to shrink these bunched up areas here to bring this back to straight, and then we'll stretch this area out and shrink this area back down. Downside of this machine, instead of using the fork, is it leaves ugly marks all over it. Luckily we'll probably be joining along this area anyway, so we'll probably lose most of these. Just going to go and get the other one to the same point, save changing tooling twice over. Run it through a fair few times. And just keep running it through. Drive next to each other, next to the line you just did, give you a larger radius, as I said before. It's just all about running it through multiple times on this machine. A lot slower and more accurate than using reciprocating machine. I found it's a very violent machine to get used to, and you can really mess up your piece and make a mess early on, as I've learnt multiple times. Wasn't really paying attention. I realised I was meant to actually come back straight on here, so we'll start addressing that before it's too late. So I'll definitely have to get a tripod or something instead of trying to do all this one-handed and film with my phone. Makes it a bit ridiculous. But this is all just like trial and error stuff that I've learned. Is when I first got the bead roller, I was like, I wonder what this will do, and I'll push it through a bit of steel and I'll be like, oh, okay, it does that. And then I'll think it's the right way to do it, and I'll try it on a piece and it'll just totally mess it up, and I'll be like, oh, okay, I won't do that again. So it's all just a learning curve of I wonder what happens kind of thing. I'm very curious on how metal reacts to different dyes and stuff like that. That's how I've learned all this, is just trial and error, and a lot of error, really. Like, I've messed up a lot of stuff that has taken me so many more hours to fix problems just because I was curious on what would happen if I tried something on it. So the difference of doing something like this by hand instead of actually press dyeing it like is in the factory, or hammer forming for example, is it just moves a lot more. You got to deal with a lot more problems after the fact, like stretching and shrinking in areas to correct it and bring it back to straight. Whereas if it's just a press dye, it's got to go where it's got to go. It's got no choice. It automatically shrinks and stretches those areas for you. Okay, so I've nearly got it 90 at one end, but obviously from my mistake before of running the bead roller through here twice without realising I'm an idiot and I've got to actually go here, it's now made the metal bunch up a bit more because it's stretched and there's too much material there. So I might go over to the kick shrinker and try and get rid of this issue before we go any further. So here we're just trying to get rid of this excess metal here, so we'll just give it a shrink down. So just stomp on this and it'll squeeze these two dies together, that it's pinching the metal together and squashing it, shrinking it essentially. And none of these are fancy machines. This is just all Hafco machines that I've painted just to match the theme of the shop a little bit. Acquired these things over time. I think when I first got here I only just had this and that little English wheel, and that's all I had, and I really did everything else by hand, and it was a struggle, and I slowly acquired things as I did jobs and could afford to buy more tooling, and until I got to this point 2 years later almost of being here, and I still haven't got all the tools that I want. I've still got a shitty pan brake and stuff like that, but that's what you do when you haven't got money to dump 200 grand into your shop. Okay, to save leaving marks on it, I'm just going to use the linear dies in the machine instead of using the kick stretcher, because it leaves a lot of jaw marks on there, and this is faster. Literally one pass and it's now straight, but it's also dropped this line in a little bit, so I'll pump that back out on the bead roller or on this, whatever. Okay, I gave it a kick shrink in this area, so it is coming. I'm just going to put it through the bead roller now and just pop a bit more stretch in this area here, and it should give me a lot straighter piece. Alternatively, you can chuck it in the wheel and bump this area up. So we'll just give this a few bops to bring it out and help it before we go back to the bead roller. Okay, after we've pumped this area out, it's now spread its problem to the middle. So we need to stretch the middle out now. Harder than that, coming along. Okay, a few passes on the linear dies and it's straightened this area up. Now I've got to shrink this again. So all these do is exact same as the kick shrinker. It moves the metal sideways only, but just doesn't leave bad jaw marks like the kick stretcher. Okay, so I'm using the kick shrinker to just get this area pulled inwards, and we should be on then. Okay, it's close to being straight now. A bit of stuffing around, shrinking and stretching in areas. You could go about it another way and only do two bits at a 45, but because I'm doing another piece here that comes along and returns the opposite way, I find that would be actually much harder, so I'd rather battle and do this bit out of one piece, and I got the easy piece at the bottom. So yeah, we've got one more return to make. It's going to come this way, join onto this piece, and we're going to join on the top here as we tip this over to lay flat on here. You're probably thinking, hey, hang on, that's pretty close to the tyre there, but it's actually hung up on this lip there, so I will change the shape of this lip for the bottom of the scuttle to suit the new height. It's just sitting there at the moment. You can see the two pieces there laying on each other. Get the other side to the same point. You can obviously see what's going to happen here. We've got a big arc in the middle here, and we've got to pull this area in. So rinse and repeat. Probably easier to see in this light. See how it's wanting to buckle in. Pump this area up to help it out so that it can actually be straight. Doesn't need much, just a few hits along here. We're not going to keep this area dead straight anyway. We're going to pump this out and put a nice strengthening bead through it anyway, so don't worry too much if you're not getting it dead flat and you've got high spots. We're going to pump this area fairly domed. So okay, so in addition to these T-handle dollies that you can buy from Hafco, I bought this Jones Way little chisel kit, and it's like a quick release thing. It comes with all these little dies, and it's been the really handy thing to have, because I made an opposite holder for it so I can put these into this hammer stand and you use these as the dolly in working as in reverse, and it's actually been really helpful for some tricky little areas that have stumped me. So I'll try and find the kit I bought, and I'll throw a link up on there if anyone's actually interested, but worth its weight in gold, that little kit. Okay, so got both of them to the same point. The other side, I'm going to give it slightly more of a kick, I think, just so it butts up to this nice and doesn't strain the hell out of it when we're clamping it. So let's give it a bit more of a kick in the center before we tip this edge over. And obviously to get that to bow outwards, I'm going to put this in the linear die, and it's going to stretch the metal outwards only. So when this goes outwards, this is going to bow. We wanted. Obviously it's pretty drastic over the flat one. I just want to shrink this area in a bit more to give that a flat. Okay, trimmed off that little lip we were talking about earlier. It's holding us up. See where we're sitting at. So, sitting good. So now, give it a tiny bit more of a trim, but I think I want to do this flange first on these edges so that it pushes it back 30mm before we play with this top. Okay, so you can obviously see what's taking shape here. I've got to do this flange and the bottoms, which is only pretty small factory, but I'm going to try and tip it as a 30 first. There's two ways I could go about it. I could cut this and do two separate folds, but I'm going to try and tip it first, and if it fucks it up, it fucks it up, but I may as well try it first, see what it does. Okay, so we're just going to drive this over at about 30mm thick the whole way and see what it does. Okay, I just did the first pass without filming it with my phone so I can make it a bit more accurate, and we'll just follow that and see what happens. So it's pretty much just laughing at it at the moment and not really moving the metal. As we add more force upwards, it should slowly start to come around. This is so much harder one-handed, but it is what it is. Okay, we've got a definitive line on there. It's not really enjoying trying to come over, but we'll get there. Might go over to the bench and just give it a bit of manual assistance. We'll use that tool holder like I talked about earlier. Pop this off. Put that in there. And then we'll just choose something to tip the edge over with. Okay, so now we've got a definitive line, we can actually sit that against this die. Just give it a few taps to help it over a bit before we go back to the roller. So the top's going to come around really easily, but where the bottom's struggling is trying to come around, but this has got to stretch so far to let that turn over, so it's really going to fight you. Okay, so it's coming around, looks like a crumpled piece of dog shit in this area. So we'll just keep stretching this right here, and it's going to let it come around. Okay, so I use the anvil to help me out in this area, just by putting it against and giving it a tap to let it come up. And now it's not letting that area be 90, so we've got to take this to kick shrink up and stretch this area to let it pull around. Okay, so 5 minutes of hitting and turned a flange on there. Yeah, it's harder than cutting and welding it, but I find it gives you a nicer end result and much more rewarding to do it out of one piece. So now we've just got to trim this down so we can come in a little bit more, and then we can turn this edge over so it sits flat on here and worry about getting this to meet up and do its return backwards. Okay, gave it a haircut. Now let's do this tip. Okay, it's future me talking to old me to address this issue of it not fitting in the bead roller because you've tipped this edge. So this strengthening bead has to be marked and put in before you tip this edge. Okay, so just a little relief on the end, slip it in a pan brake, put the fold on it, sit them back on. So I think it'll be something like bending from there to about there, I'm guessing, hard to tell. So sometimes you're actually restricted for depth as well on pan brakes and even press brakes, so I'm going to tip this manually, this little flange. It's the same principle as before here to cut a relief. Use the tipping die, soft lower wheel, and that will pull this area up as long as you drive straight along the line. Sometimes I drive pretty crazy on there and it's a bit wobbly and you've got to dress it up by hand. Okay, done our first tip and then just dressed it up a little bit with this anvil. Go check it on the car and see how much we need to stretch this edge to give it the arc. Okay, so a little. And we've got to get 15mm out of it, so we'll give this a stretch in the middle and we'll curve that around. Okay, so driver side is roughed out. I'm going to get the other one to the same point and worry about this strengthening bead after we've got them both at the same point fitting nice. Okay, so passenger side flange added. Now I did stuff it up. I ran the tipping wheel with a bit too much pressure for my indentation line, and I've let it tear because there's not enough material there in that one spot. So just be wary when you do run your line, just do gradual pressure and just go bit by bit, and just go help it over on the bench. But still easy fix, just TIG that little slit up and happy days. Still easier than cutting and adding a section in my opinion. But okay, so I got the other one mirrored. It's all the same. Just have to worry about what pattern we're going to run on here now to strengthen it up. Okay, so factory, it's got this squiggly boy. I'll put something similar in it. Alrighty, scribbled on. Okay, so we're going to start the bead off with the largest bead that we got on the roller. Oh, that isn't going to work unless I trim this down. I don't really want to lose that just yet, so I'm going to try another approach. And before anyone says, why don't you just flip the dies, it also won't fit. So I tried to push it up with the soft wheel, but it still didn't like it. It still just wanted to clash on everything, so just give up. I'll use the beading tool in the little hammer. Just go really slow. I'll just go probably as slow as I can go, just to tap it in carefully using the light as a guide, and then I'll ramp it right up and I'll put them dies in the pull max, which has a harder hit than this thing. Okay, both lightly beaded with the little hammer, so not as deep as it can go yet. So now I've switched the dies, put them in this, and this has got a faster, heavier hit, so it'll give it the finishing pass on it. Okay, so beads are added. Tidy up all of the hammer marks along this edge and here. See them better from the other side. Okay, skirt supports back on, looking good. Tight everywhere. It's got this lip to turn this way. Okay, this lip. Pretty sure the guard sits on it. Okay, skirt supports ready to go back on that top lip. Okay, fitting nice. Okay, skirt supports are clamped back in place. I can now do this lip here, because I might even incorporate that with the new wheel tub, depending on where we put the air jacks as well. So I might actually start with the wheel tub, get a new wheel tub made, same firewall height. Same with this side. Can't really go too much further till I play with the wheel tub. Okay, and that's that. That's how to make these in one piece. Yeah, you could have gone about it a different way and welded along the top on a joint, or done 245s for this corner, but I'm just showing that you can actually do it out of one piece relatively easy with pretty basic tools. So thanks again for watching. I hope you learned something here, and you can use these shapes on a similar panel on your own car. And if you have any questions, just sing out, send a message, write a comment, and I'll get back to you. Hopefully next week we can do a video of how to make these front tubs and skirt areas.